Ready? Yeah. All right. All right, welcome. Yeah, there we go. Welcome for those of you here in person and those of you who are watching us at home. So the plan for tonight is we have some slides that we're going to go through to provide some information about the referendum, and then we'll open it up to questions. So tonight's agenda, we're going to talk, I'm going to give you a little information about our district, talk a little bit about what is a bond referendum. We're going to talk about the facility task force, the information that they looked at to determine the need. We'll talk about the questions 1 and 2 for the referendum, talk about the impact we'll have on taxes and timeline for the projects, and then what's next and when and where we vote, and then we'll open it up to questions that we may have. So Rochester Public Schools is the 7th largest district in the state of Minnesota. Our enrollment this year is 18,296 students as of October 1. We employ more than 2,500 individuals in our district, and we have over 7,000 volunteers that provide 23,000 hours of service to our district. We serve a 208 square mile area. Currently have 17 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 3 comprehensive high schools, 1 alternative learning center, a current technical center, and 2 early learning schools. We have 6 district-wide option schools or programs. This past year, our graduation rate is 87% for 4 years. If you take the ALC out of that, our graduation rate is 94%. We have a AA credit rating with a stable outlook assigned by S&P Global Ratings. So on November 5th, we're going to go to a bond referendum. It's a 2-question referendum. And let's talk a little bit about what is a bond referendum. The district has very limited options for capital needs. We do have some state funding that we get to replace or repair things, like to replace a parking lot, repair a roof, but we do not have a funding source to build new. So really the only option we have is to do a referendum. What is a bond referendum? It's a fixed dollar amount. It doesn't change the same amount, doesn't go up or increase over time. It's very similar to your home mortgage. You borrow X amount of dollars to purchase a home, and that's the same amount of dollars it does. However, your payment, because you're paying interest just like you do on your mortgage, we're taking out over 20 years, so we will pay interest on that money that we are borrowing. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Actually, I got a mic on me.
Okay.
So, when we talk about facility needs, the first piece, if you can go to the next slide, was the task force development. So in June of 2018, possibly April, or June of 2018, the district hired a group of consultants to work with their task force and identify both capacity of facilities as well as the current enrollment and enrollment projections. And so when you look at the items up there, you can see some of the capacity pieces that we'll talk about in more detail, as well as some of the background data and some of the dialogue sessions. So the community, we had what we called citizen voice meetings, and there were altogether 4 of those to gather feedback based on what the facilities task force was providing as recommendations. We also had multiple meetings with the school board of the city or of the Rochester Public Schools to make sure that they were up to speed and had all the information to make a final recommendation. Prior to them making a final recommendation, we did do a community survey which had information regarding that. And so when we talk about what is the need, the information that you see up there, the 1,000 students, that is literally coming from the enrollment data from the district from 5 years back, and we did look further back too, but the most recent 5 years seemed appropriate. The other piece that we looked at was the growth of the district over the next 5 years and 10 years, but we decided to base the referendum on the 5-year element, because once you get out beyond that 5 years, it becomes much more difficult to project or factor things in. But we did have a high, medium, and low growth rate beyond the 5-year period. The 5-year enrollment projection was 1,200 students, and that is based both on birth data as well as housing data and the number of homes being built, including multifamily, single family, and duplex, those types of elements. Other items that came up as needs when we talked with the task force was safety of students and staff, and that was basically creating equity within the buildings. The district has been making safety and security improvements to the facilities as they work on them, but not all facilities are at the same level yet, and to do that, the funding just isn't there. They did receive some funding from the state when the state did that major security improvement, but that major security improvement did not make it very far across the state. The last item is the educational support spaces at the middle school and high school, and what you'll see there is the high school piece is the auditoriums, and then the middle school is question 2. So when we talk about building capacities, you can see by the numbers up there, one of the items to talk about on how the capacity was generated, and that was by actual number of classrooms within each building and the student class size that was approved by the school board. And so that is how the capacities were generated, and then the enrollment is obviously from the information. So when we talk about the facility needs survey, school perspective or perceptions is the group that administered the survey. They've been doing survey administration across the country for a number of years. The survey in your district went to 57,000 homes, and that does go beyond the city limits. That includes some of the other locations across the county and some of your smaller communities that are within the school district itself. The school district boundary is larger than the city limits. So the information from that survey was presented to the school board, and from that presentation and recommendation from school perceptions, the idea of a bond tolerance and a scope of work was defined.
So I mentioned earlier it's a 2-question referendum. Question 1 is a $171.4 million, and so what's the tax impact? We typically use a $200,000 home value because the median homes in Rochester is $163,400, but we rounded up to $200,000. So for question 1 for the $171.4 million, it's $42 increase annually, or $3.50 increase per month as of what you're paying now and what it would increase moving forward if the referendum passes. So what do we get with that $171.4 million? We're going to build a new elementary on land that the district owns in northwest Rochester. We own part of the land, and the city owns the other part of the land, so we'll build a new elementary there with a capacity of 720 students. And then reconstruct Bishop Elementary. We would build a larger building on the existing campus that will hold 720 students, move the new students in, and then tear down the old building. Longfellow's the same way. We either will do that, do a rebuild on the existing campus, or we are in conversation with Parks and Rec. There is soccer fields south of the Longfellow building. We're having conversation with Park and Rec where they would give us some land to build a new school. In exchange, we would give them the Longfellow building and the land. And so we have that option, or if that doesn't go through, I think Park Board's going to vote on that at their December meeting. So if that doesn't fall through, then we'll build it on the existing land. And then build a new middle school. There's been a lot of, with a capacity of 1,200 students, there's been a lot of discussion about where that's going to be located. At this time, we do not have a specific location. We are looking at in the southwest because we feel it's a good location to pull students across from Willow Creek and some students down from John Adams, and then we can pull some students from Kellogg over to John Adams to balance out our middle school enrollment. As I mentioned earlier, it's not definite in that location. We have a purchase agreement with a farmer for 150 acres in southwest Rochester. That agreement is pending 2 things. 1, the referendum has to pass, and then the second part of that is that the city has to okay annexing that land become part of the city. So if neither of those things happen, the agreement goes away. We do not, we're not committed to that land. We are in still conversation with the city council on that piece of property. We're also looking at some other locations southwest and maybe looking even in the northwest part of the city. But we are going to build a middle school somewhere. We do need one. I'm confident that we will find a location that both the city and the district are comfortable with and feel it will work out. So we'll continue having those conversations with the city council. The survey results, as Kevin mentioned, we're trying to accomplish two things. One, what is the tax tolerance? And then what do you think of the projects that we propose? Well, one of the results of the survey also suggested that the district buy additional land now for future use. We know someday out in the future, we're going to need that fourth high school. So the results of the survey said buy the land now. It's going to be cheaper now than maybe it will be 7-10 years down the road. So you have that land ready to go for that fourth high school, and probably going to need an additional elementary at that time. So that's why we were looking at the 150 acres in Southwest, knowing someday we're going to need that fourth high school. And then upgrading the safety and security at all schools, and Kevin touched on that a little bit, but right now not all of our schools have a secured entrance, which means you get buzzed into the first door, but the only place you can go after that is directly into the office. Right now we have schools that once you get buzzed in, you have access to the entire building. So we want to make sure that all of our schools have a secured entrance. The second part of that security is a lot of in the classrooms and in the hallways, we have the fire alarms. And the old alarms now, you probably had them back when you were in school, it's that real loud noise that hurts your ears. Well, if I'm a student or a staff member who cannot hear, I don't know what's going on. So the new systems now have different color of lights that blink so you know what kind of emergency you're dealing with. They still have the sound, but they have different color lights blinking so you know, is it a fire, tornado, what's going on? And then the third part of that safety and security is we want to make sure that our doors are hooked up. So if somebody goes out a door that they're not supposed to go out, it sends an alarm to a computer to let us know that somebody went out a door that they shouldn't have. So those are the three parts of security and safety. And then upgrade high school auditoriums, new lighting and new sound in the 3 high school auditoriums. Not only is that a need for our students who put on these amazing musical performances, but it's also an area that gets used quite often by our community. They want to rent our auditoriums. In some cases, they want to rent it and then they tell us what their needs are. We have to go out and rent sound equipment to meet their needs because we currently don't have it. So this would eliminate that problem. So question 1, again, new elementary school on land that we own with the city in the Schmidt Park property area, capacity 720 students, reconstruct Bishop or Longfellow Elementary. Construct would occur at the existing campus area. New middle school, I talked already about the purchase agreement we have in Southwest Rochester, contingent upon referendum passing and the city approving it, and then purchase land for additional growth. Talked about upgrading the safety and security, and then the high school auditorium. So, question 2. I often get asked, why do you have a question 2? Why is not all part of question 1? It was really based on the data, the results of the survey. There's good support up to $172 million. After that amount, the support started dropping off. And also when you look within that survey, this project was not supported at the level that we were comfortable with. And we did not want to risk losing it all for something that, based on the results of the survey, did not show good support. So this is why it's second question. Not that we don't value the need of a pool, but the data did not support that it should be part of the first question. So question 2, $9.5 million for that same $200,000 home. It's $6 additional annually or another 50 cents per month. Question 2 is contingent on the first question passing. Task force recommended closing and repurposing the middle school pools to save on operating costs. not only, just in the time that I've been here, we put anywhere from $500,000 to $600,000 into the middle school pools, just so we can keep them running. That's not even talking about the daily operating cost of running a pool. So closing those middle school pools and repurpose them, we would work with the building to determine what's your facility needs for your building and convert those spaces to that. We do know we do have one district need facility-wise. We do not have a gym for our 3 high school teams, gymnastics teams. We are renting a gym right now, and the 3 teams practice in that gym, and their meets are in that gym. So we could potentially convert one of these pools into a gymnastics gym for our 3 high school teams. Right now, Male High School pool is not deep enough for them to dive, so their divers have to go to John Marshall for practice. And whenever Male has a meet, the diving competition is held at John Marshall, and then we come back to Male for the rest of the swim meet. So we want to make their pool diving area deeper so they can have diving competition in their pool, and then build a competitive pool at Century High School. They currently do not have a pool. Their team travels to Willow Creek Middle School for practices, and then their competition has to be at another location. So if we put the 2 questions together, for that same $200,000 home, it's $48 a year or $4 per month, based on what you're paying now, and this is the increase it will be if the referendum passes. If you go to our district website, there's this link there where you can calculate how it's going to impact you personally, either your home value, or if you're a business owner, you can go in there, put in your value, and it'll kick out and tell you exactly how it's going to impact you personally. So, time frame. Kevin.
So when we talk about the time frame for the facilities, pending a successful referendum in the fall of 2019, meaning November 5th, here next week, the projects would likely go out to bid the winter of 2020. We may look at fast-tracking a project or 2 to separate the summer construction so we don't overload the local market. And then you see that most of the construction would start spring, summer of 2021, depending on if it's a site that's occupied or if it's a greenfield site would depend on whether or not the buildings would start in April versus June. So at a Bishop location, for instance, generally we would work with the contractors to find out if we can delay the start until the students have left for the summer, because that initial part is pretty invasive. But on sites where there is not an existing building, like the Northwest site, that would start as soon as the frost had left the ground. When we talk about when these facilities will open, it would be 2022 would be the start of the school year in the facilities, and that basically leaves that 15 to 17 month time frame for construction, and then a month or at least a few weeks for the district to ready the buildings for the students coming in. And then lastly, the district has already done interviews and made a selection for a construction manager as an advisor, and pending a successful referendum, that group would be on board immediately to help with the planning and strategy for the projects themselves.
So, what if it don't pass? Well, obviously we're running out of space, so we'd have to look at the results of the voting and readjust and go out again and ask for the voters again, most likely the fall of 2020. I personally don't think we could turn it around that quickly to do it again in the spring, because we'd really have to analyze the results of the voting and determine what projects stay on, which one do we pull off, how much do we reduce it down to. So we'd really need probably the fall of 2020 to give us time to do all of that and to re-educate the voters so they know what we're asking for the second time. So that's pretty much where we're at. I mean, we have to do it. We're to the point where we can't do boundary adjustments anymore. We opened up 2 preschools to pull kids out of elementary buildings if we have classroom space. So we would have to keep trying it, or increase class sizes. Would have to just keep putting more kids, stuffing more kids in classrooms because we don't have any other space. So, last thing we want to talk about, remind everybody, vote November 5th. We do have early voting now. It's been open here at the Edison Building, so you can stop by from 8 to 4:45. Enter the west door, walk right in, and it's about a 5-minute process. I did it a couple weeks ago. You fill out a piece of paper, walk in with your driver's license, get your ballot, and you're out of there. So we've had over 1,000 people already take advantage of that option and have voted early. We're also will be open on November 2nd, that's Saturday, from 10 to 3 p.m. for those who still want to take advantage of that early voting. If not, you can go to your polling place on November 5th and vote at that time. Whoop. So at this time, we will open up to questions. Those of you who are watching at home, there's a link there that you can also submit questions, and we have people monitoring the computers and will let us know the questions that you may have. So any questions? Yes.
What's the length of the bond?
Yeah, the question, I'm going to repeat your question so those at home know what was asked. The question was, what's the length of the bond? It'll be for 20 years. Well, one of the questions that I've been asked a few times, so I'll fill in while you're thinking, is what about the special programs that we have? And at this time, the task force did make recommendations. For example, one of the recommendations is to close the Friedel Middle School and repurpose that building for another need that the district has. If that happens, we would, a couple things. The highly gifted program would continue, but it would either move to the new middle school or we would have that program at every middle school. And a few years ago when our enrollment in that program increased so much that we ended up adding some classrooms at Kellogg. At that time we even had conversation about should we have the program at every middle school, and the numbers that just weren't having that, but we would either look at how our numbers, does it justify having that program in every middle school, or would we move the Friedel part of that program to the new middle school? There's also some conversations about looking at moving the Spanish immersion program or the newcomers program to one of the other elementaries to balance out our diversity within our district. Those are all recommendations made by the task force, but once the referendum passes, as we move forward down the process, we will work with the school board to finalize those decisions. We also did talk about boundaries. We did make a commitment that a year prior to the new school's opening, we would have the boundary information out so families would be aware of how the new schools, obviously we'll have to readjust some boundaries to open up the new school. So we made a commitment that a year before then, we would get that information out to parents and families so they would know where their school would be. So once the referendum passes, we'll continue working on the programming and start looking a little bit on the boundary work. So are we getting any questions online? No.
Ask some that
Okay.
frequently asked.
All right.
Okay. Explain the reasoning behind the size of the schools being proposed.
Yes, do you want to hit that first and then I'll...
I certainly can.
Repeat the question.
So one of the questions was, please explain the rationale or the reasoning for the size of the schools that are proposed. So when we started the process, as the consultants, we met with the task force, we met with the cabinet, and then we made presentations to the school board regarding multiple size options for the buildings. The existing buildings in the district range from about 290 to 300 students at the small end to well over 860, 880 at some of the larger buildings. So when we talked about elementary school size, we talked about, are we talking about 360? Are we talking about 720? Are we talking about 1080 for the right size of facilities? And although a lot of individuals like the concept of a 360 building, what it became very apparent was class size as an indicator, and then efficiency and making sure that we could provide the services to all of the students. And so when you talk about services to the students, whether it's a nurse or a social worker or a psychologist, when you're in those smaller buildings, you end up sharing that person among multiple buildings. And if a student has an issue on a day that that individual isn't there, they're not getting the service or the access they need. So when you start to look at a 720 student building, it's large enough to have those services embedded within the facility, but not so large that it becomes a daunting task. And again, the district does have multiple buildings that are over 720, as well as a couple that are at capacity at about 720. So the idea of a 720 student building felt like it fit. When we talk about the middle school of 1,200, 3 of the existing middle schools are at about that 1,100 plus or minus range. And so the concept of a 1,200 student middle school felt like it worked pretty well. That also ties in, if you start talking about class sizes, to what a preferred high school size would be, which then allows it to tie in directly as far as boundaries and student count at the different levels.
Yeah, I would also add to that, there was some discussion about smaller schools do better, and I guess we can look at our own district. One of our highest performing elementaries is almost 900 students. So I really believe it's the culture within the walls of the building that create that type of success. So, and then the other thing that kind of ties along with this, we sometimes get asked, well, why aren't you looking at the high schools? They're at 94% capacity. And really, you know, high schools you can run at a higher capacity because you very seldom have all of the students in the building at the same time. We know we have about 200 to 250 of our high school students per semester are at RCTC for the entire day taking PSCO college courses. We know that we have over 1,000 of our students every day throughout the day being bused to CTEC for a couple classes and then bused back to their comprehensive high school. We also know that our high schools have open campus for juniors and seniors, so when they don't have class, most of them leave the building. So you can run your high school capacity beyond that 100% just because you don't have all those students in the building all at the same time. So any other questions?
I can ask another one that
Sure.
that we're commonly getting. Will boundaries change at all during this process?
Yes, question that was, will boundaries change? And yes, you know, when we open up 2 larger elementaries and 2 totally new schools, you're going to have to adjust boundaries. You don't want to have those buildings and have them sit vacant. So we would have to make adjustments in boundaries to try to balance out our enrollment across the district. So there will be district boundaries that's going to impact the entire district. So we did do some preliminary markups of boundaries with the task force when we were trying to determine where's the best location for these new schools based on where the growth in particular areas that we're seeing. But once the referendum passes, we'll really sit down and spend some time looking at those boundaries. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we will make those public and make parents and families aware a year prior to the new school's opening.
Well, I'll give you one more.
Sure, we'll take another one.
That just gives everyone a chance to give us other questions. Explain the difference between operating and capital referendums, and then how will we pay for how are we going to cover the overhead costs?
Okay, question is, what's the difference between an operating referendum, which we passed in 2015, compared to this one, which is a facilities referendum? The one we passed in 2015 was an operating. It was just kind of what it says, to operate and run the school. It paid salaries for staff, it paid our bus transportation contract, it paid for utilities. So just kind of our operating expenses is why they call it an operating referendum. The current one we're asking for now is for facilities to build new buildings, and that's kind of the difference between the two. And then the second part of that question was, Heather, what was the second part of that question?
How will we pay for the overhead?
Okay, yeah, we get asked, well, have you factored in the operating cost of these new schools? And we know that we're going to have some operating costs increase when you do open two of the schools are the same schools, just going to make them built bigger. But we have two brand new schools, so we know we have staffing like administration, clerical, and nurses that you are going to have to account for, and we do have that planned in our budget as we look. We do 5-year projections and kind of predict how our budget's going to be in the next 5 years. We have that factored in. But a lot of, as we adjust boundaries, some students from school A are going to move into the new school while they're going to take some staff with them. So we see at the very beginning, we do know we're going to have some increased operating costs. But as our enrollment continues to grow, more funding comes in because our funding is strictly based on per student. So as we get more students, more money comes to the district to educate them, so to help with the operating cost. Okay, that's all the questions we have so far. Anybody here in the audience that's live with us have any questions for us? Something you've been wanting to know or ask? Yes.
So is the pool essentially going to be a competition level pool?
So the question is, will the pool at Century be a competition pool? I guess it depends how I'm not sure how we're defining competition, but it is going to be built so we can hold like the Big 9 conference meet, which is going to have enough lanes to hold. I think that's kind of what they mean by competition. So that is the plan, to make it that size so we can host the Big 9 tournament swim meet, which we do, but we end up renting the rec center. Oh, I guess it's not called the rec center anymore, but that facility for the Big 9 competition, because even the JM pool doesn't have enough lanes for that. But yes, the plan is for it to be a competitive so we can hold big meets.
I think everyone's very well informed, right?
Yes. Well, they must be. But I would also say that if you want more information, you can go to our district website. As soon as you open up the district website, up in the left-hand top, there's says referendum. Open that up. And every monthly presentation that was given by the task force to the school board is there. There's a lot of other information there. There's question and answers. People have submitted questions. We've responded to those questions, and we post them on the website. The tax calculator is there as well. There's a couple of videos. There's a video that I created about the referendum. There's a video created by John Carlson, our Executive Director of Business and Finance, on the financial side of the referendum. So there's really a lot of good information on the district website. So, if you feel you need some more information, that's really a good place to go to get all your questions and answered, or submit us a question and we'd be happy to respond to that question. All right. Well, I know we're scheduled to go to 7 p.m., but unless we have additional questions online, I think we may go ahead and shut this down. Again, thank you for being here in person to join us, or those of you who are at home online watching the meeting. We appreciate your interest, and like I said, if there's any questions, if something come up later, don't hesitate to give us, contact us, give us a call, or there is an email address that you can submit your questions. We'd be happy to respond to those. And then last thing I'll say is I encourage you all to get out and vote. Either vote early, come here to the Edison building between 8 and 4:45, or go to your polling place on November 5th. So again, thank you for joining us tonight.